Julia Child knew a thing or two about cooking, and these quick tips will take your food to the next level. Next time you're making any of these, remember these helpful tricks straight from the queen of cookery herself. Despite scrambled eggs' simplicity, the number of ways to make them seems to expand every day. Should you add water or milk to your eggs? What about cream? Do you cook them on a low temperature and stir them as little as possible? Or do you use high heat and a fast-moving spatula? Ultimately, these decisions are down to personal preference. But Julia Child has some expert advice that applies to pretty much any option. Scrambled eggs will continue to cook through residual heat even after you've removed them from the burner. To make sure her eggs didn't overcook once they're off the heat, Child always kept a few tablespoons of raw egg to pour into the scramble just before serving it, to bring down its temperature and stop it from continuing to cook. Baking powder is the best way to make cakes and breads rise without yeast. But it isn't always that simple. Sometimes you can put in the prescribed amount of baking powder only to find that the cake or bread you're making stays flat. You might be tempted to start the recipe over from the beginning and simply add more baking powder, but you're likely to end up with a stubbornly flat and now metallic-tasting result. The most common problem is age. Like milk, baking powder doesn't last forever. But unlike milk, there's no change in smell or appearance, so it can be tricky to determine whether it's outdated until it's too late. In general, baking powder starts to lose its strength after 6 months. But unless you put a Post-it note on the can when you buy it, you'll probably lose track. Julia Child's solution makes things infinitely simpler. Instead of adding it to your batter and crossing your fingers, stir a teaspoon of the powder into a half cup of warm water. If it starts to bubble, you're good to go. If it sinks and dissolves without so much as a fizz, it's best to repurpose it into homemade cleaning products and get a fresh can. No store-bought salad dressing can beat the homemade kind when it's done well. The trouble is, it's hard to get the balance of ingredients just right, regardless of whether you're using a recipe or going off of intuition. In theory, it should be pretty straightforward. Some type of oil, an acid, a little salt, and maybe some sweetness. In practice, however, it rarely works out this way. Julia Child was adamant that bottled salad dressing was a waste of money, as dressing is easy to make at home and the store-bought versions never use good oil. While easy might not be the first word that comes to mind when you think about making salad dressing, Child had good reason to be so forthright. As she explained in an episode of The French Chef, the proportions for salad dressing in many recipes are not quite right. Instead of using a 1:3 ratio of acid to oil, she recommended cutting down on the vinegar or lemon juice. Her advice was to use the 1:5 ratio of a dry martini, which we can all agree is the most classy and memorable comparison that a salad dressing recipe could hope for. How do you serve it? Well, Child has another tip for that. Mix the dressing into the salad in a bowl, not on a plate.
I hate it when people put salad on a plate and then they pour dressing over it and you want all the leaves coated with the dressing.
When prepared well, eggplant can be so buttery it almost melts in your mouth. However, it can also end up dry, spongy, and downright leathery. The purple vegetable is a foundational ingredient in recipes such as moussaka and baba ganoush, and there's nothing else that can credibly substitute it. Finding a preparation method that works every time will save you from inconsistent results. And luckily, Julia Child had the answer. To begin with, you need to make sure you're cooking with a tasty eggplant. If you found the vegetable to be bitter in the past, it likely had more to do with the quality of the raw ingredient. Make sure you purchase ones that are shiny with tight skin rather than ones that are dull and slightly shriveled. To remove potential bitterness, cut the eggplant into round slices about ½ inch thick and sprinkle them with salt. After they've rested for about 20 minutes, press a paper towel on top to absorb the moisture. If you want the eggplant to be extra buttery and have struggled with dry eggplant in the past, Steam or bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for a few minutes before adding it to a recipe. You could even do this with eggplant parmesan before breading and baking it. It will be so tender you could eat it with a spoon.
Well, one of the great things to do is lasagna.
There are many ways to make lasagna, but no matter what style you go for, Julia Child's advice on getting the sauce just right is worth following every time. Since most lasagna recipes revolve around pasta, cheese, and tomato sauce, paying careful attention to each of these elements will pay dividends. Instead of using just canned tomatoes or just fresh tomatoes for the sauce, Child recommended using both. Canned tomatoes and store-bought tomato sauce, though convenient, just don't have the bright, acidic flavor of fresh tomatoes. But fresh tomatoes cook down to almost nothing and spoil quickly, so purchasing enough for an entire lasagna can be impractical. By compromising with a half-and-half ratio, you'll have powerfully fresh tomato flavor and enough substance to fill out the casserole dish. Child recommended blanching whole tomatoes for 10 seconds to make their skins easy to remove. Then she suggested slicing the tomatoes in half and removing the seeds over a sieve to catch the juice. Roughly chop them, then seed and strain an equal amount of Italian plum tomatoes. From here, you can proceed with the tomato sauce recipe using both types of tomatoes. Garlic is one of the most common ingredients in savory recipes, suffusing dishes with its singular, potent flavor.
Are you really, enjoying that?
Nah, needs garlic.
Many cooks would be as lost without garlic in their kitchens as they would be without salt. Given how often many of us use this humble bulb, we're always on the lookout for new ways to make it easier to cook with. Julia Child had a few tricks up her sleeve on that account. Whether you use a garlic press, a knife, or a grater, there is no perfect way to prepare garlic. It has papery skin that's hard to peel, and if you want it to blend seamlessly with other ingredients, it needs to be minced into teeny tiny pieces. Child's solution to these common conundrums was simple but effective. Start by covering a clove of garlic with the flat side of your knife and bash it with the palm of your hand. This will cause the skin to break and be easily removed. Then chop the clove a few times and sprinkle it with salt, and mash it again with a flat blade. According to Child, the salt softens the clove, making it easier to mash. You then have garlic paste that can easily be added to your recipe. Just make sure to account for the additional salt. Having been trained in the French tradition, Julia Child knew a thing or two about bread making. Luckily for us, her advice makes the process easier rather than fussier. Aside from all that waiting time while the dough rises, kneading can be the most daunting part of the bread making process. Some recipes suggest working the dough for 10 minutes or more. But 10 minutes of professional kneading might be very different from 10 minutes of kneading by a casual home baker. Knowing when you've under or overworked the dough can be tricky. Child opted for a 3-step kneading process. This gives your muscles a break and ensures that even if your technique is off, the dough will still get the treatment it needs. Once the ingredients for the bread have been combined in a food processor and a ball of dough has formed, let it sit for 5 minutes. This allows the flour to absorb the moisture, shortening the kneading process. Then, let the food processor work for about 30 revolutions of the blade and let it rest for another 2 minutes. Lastly, knead it by hand. Child recommended about 40 or 50 kneadings depending on how it feels. By finishing the kneading by hand, you'll be able to feel exactly how elastic it is and avoid over-kneading it.
That's rather rough. That's the one that hasn't rested, and this is the one that has rested, and it's begun to be smooth.
There's a lot of leeway when it comes to making scrambled and fried eggs. Even when they aren't spectacular, they're usually still pretty good. Poached eggs, on the other hand, can be a disaster. Add them to insufficiently hot water and they will fall apart before they can cook, leaving you with nothing more than a sad, lonely yolk. Add them to boiling water and the egg white will shred as soon as it hits the surface, leaving you with strands of overcooked white and a lump of mealy yolk.
Oh, that doesn't look too good.
Even if you're creating a vortex or using vinegar, you can still end up with shaggy whites rather than a smooth, opaque parcel surrounding the yolk. Julia Child had some expert advice on how to make the best poached egg every single time. All you need is a pin and some boiling water. Before you crack a single egg, prick the shells with a pin and give them a 10-second boil. The pin prick ensures that the pocket of air inside the shell doesn't expand and crack the egg as it's boiling, while the boiling sets the egg slightly so that when you crack it into the simmering water, the white doesn't disperse.
There, look, that's much, much better. That's a good tip.
Asparagus is a deliciously tender and flavorful vegetable, but making it can be such a hassle that you might just decide to make broccoli or carrots instead. With tough, fibrous stems and a high price tag, it can sometimes feel like you're throwing your money away in exchange for only a few bites of perfection. Julia Child was well aware of the pitfalls of making asparagus and had several rules of thumb to get the most out of it. First, make sure you're picking a good bunch. Look for stalks that have a similar circumference so they cook at the same rate. The buds should be tight, the stalks should be firm, and there should be no withered ends. As soon as you return from the store, treat them like a bouquet of flowers. Line the stalks up so that the tips of the buds are in line. Cut a ½ inch off the ends and put them in a jar of water. Cover them and store them in the fridge. When you're ready to cook the asparagus, the key is to peel the stalks instead of cutting the ends further.
If you've never taken the trouble to peel asparagus, you'll find that it makes absolutely all the difference in the world.
Potato salad is an easy side dish to whip up for a barbecue, potluck, or dinner party. But there are plenty of pitfalls. First, you'll need to pick the perfect potatoes for your potato salad. If you use a variety that has high starch content, such as russets, you'll find that they fall apart and turn to mash. Look instead for waxy potatoes, like red or new potatoes, both of which provide the perfect balance of flavor and structure. Child recommended boiling the potatoes until they're just barely tender, draining them, then letting them sit in a covered pan for a few minutes to firm up as they cool. She then made a somewhat surprising addition: chicken broth. Despite wanting to keep the potatoes firm and dry, adding liquid at this stage is a genius trick. Instead of absorbing the oil from the mayonnaise and becoming greasy and gummy, they absorb the broth. When you add the mayonnaise, it will cover the potatoes like a salad dressing instead of sinking into them and leaving the salad dry and gluey.